talking about what are the implications for the One Big Beautiful Bill for Puerto Rico. I think when, when it was first passed, there was quite a bit of concern that the projects in Puerto Rico were dead in the water as a result of changes particularly related to the federal tax credits associated with large solar farms. My thesis is that that concern is overblown because local policy change actually matters much more to the fact that we're not going to continue pursuing those types of projects. One question specifically for you as we start this panel and sort of continue the conversation from your presentation is, what is the actual implication? Is Puerto Rico that affected by the One Big Beautiful Bill, as affected perhaps as you might otherwise hear in the news, or are the implications really rather mild? Or do you disagree with the premise and feel free to go in a different direction?
I mean, I think that there's a balance. I see the possible restrictions, and I see the possible opportunities. The projects that, for example, and I think that's been the topic from a lot of people, it's the solar hybrid projects and those incentives, how they're going to be phased out. And there has been some talk about, well, am I supposed to just let my project die, or should I just continue to see what happens? And I mean, if your project is already going through the whole process, then obviously we tell you to continue to try and get ahead of that phase out date, and possibly reinvent yourself. I mean, the bet for me, one of the biggest lessons is that best is going to be what we have to focus on. And I think that's what the government's been doing, but private sector is also going to have to focus on that. As you said, local regulations, local statutory policy is going to be key. And in Puerto Rico, we tend to enact a lot of laws and a lot of regulations, but then there's no implementation. And I think when implementation needs, if there's going to be a strategy, it has to be a unified strategy on how we're going to battle any kind of setback from these incentives and try to see how we can find a strategic path forward where we balance whatever's going to possibly run out, which we already know what it is, and what really we have to focus on to see how we can move forward. And I think when it first came out, everybody was very afraid, and basically everything stopped. But now I think people are moving forward once they get to know what's really going on, and trying to see how they can navigate those restrictions and try to find a solution. For me, the biggest hurdle is not much the tax incentives or the tax credits, but more the sourcing for equipment, for solar specifically. We know that China is a big component of that, so trying to find that, and cost is going to be a big component as well, because yes, if a company in the U.S. is going to manufacture that equipment that's going to be used for those plants or that system here in Puerto Rico, but the costs are going to be higher than whatever comes from somewhere else. So that's going to be something that they're going to have to navigate.
That's such an important point. I was talking to a developer who's here a little bit earlier about this, and they're talking about doing a large commercial solar project, and the hurdles to the hoops to jump through to take advantage of federal tax credits and federal or the domestic content requirements, when you could pay a third of that for Chinese panels, and because of the odd, unique nexus between Puerto Rico and the federal tax system, it's actually just an easier pathway to forget about the federal tax credits and just go with the local tax regime. I know we're going to talk a lot more than just the One Big Beautiful Bill, but while we're on that, two more questions for you, Edalia. The 18 or so utility scale solar projects that are currently in development, that are contracted, that are looking to take advantage of IRA credits, crystal ball? Are they going to enter operational phase by the time these credits sunset in the end of 2027? Where are we? What's the likelihood they take full advantage of those credits?
I always like to be hopeful, but I've been practicing for 13 years in Puerto Rico law, and I think I was discussing this with some people before the panel. Puerto Rico needs, the government of Puerto Rico needs to establish a easy, straightforward permitting framework. The only way these projects are going to reach operation before these incentives run out, before the money runs out, is having the permits in place so that they can get into operation. And that's been, and I know that sometimes that's the only thing we mention in these discussions, but for me, permitting is key to get there. Forget about the incentives, forget about the one big beautiful bill. If the government of Puerto Rico does not provide that and really does it, because in paper it looks fabulous. We get executive orders every time a new governor comes into office that says that permitting is a priority, that that we're gonna streamline it, but if it doesn't get implemented, then it's really not, it doesn't work.
So staying on the one big beautiful bill for one more question, and we're going to move on to other policy changes on the federal level and how they impact Puerto Rico. One of the key tax credits that's not sunsetting is the advanced manufacturing rule, the 45X credit, albeit with new domestic components, as you mentioned. Puerto Rico's legacy strength, and John, we're going to talk to you about this, has been in industrials. Is this something that Puerto Rico can take advantage of? We're going to have a Solex opening in Aguadilla, and I know Invest Puerto Rico was involved in helping land them on the island. How scalable is that? How much of a manufacturing role can Puerto Rico have as the country as a writ large is attracting industrials back to the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that's the key. Manufacturing has always been a very important component of the economy in Puerto Rico, and energy has always been a hurdle for them. We know that manufacturing that currently exists in Puerto Rico, the companies are making every effort to try and become reliant on their own energy generation, and these credits are obviously going to be a good thing for them to continue, and it's going to be an attractive point for manufacturing from the outside to come into Puerto Rico, and that's an opportunity. That's one of those opportunity places or options that they have. So I think that's going to be that has to be one of the focus.
Luis, broaden the conversation with us. Puerto Rico's the U.S. jurisdiction most dependent on federal funds. We have a new administration in Washington who is looking at scaling back federal expenditures in a lot of different ways that are going to impact Puerto Rico. How does Puerto Rico's relationship with Washington change during this gubernatorial term, this presidential term, but also specifically the federal budget that was just passed last week? How does Puerto Rico move forward in a post-federal fund or a new federal fund landscape? And maybe what does that mean for the energy sector?
Well, to open with a disclaimer, my comments are my comments and not of my employer.
Understood. Thank you.
Having said that, I think we need to understand the current landscape. The current landscape at the DC level, I'm based in DC. The current landscape in DC is very fluid. We have at this point a record number of executive orders. If we take, for example, the period of January to August 2025, we have 196 executive orders. If we compare that with the entire President Trump's first term, we see that they are just about 20-ish in the amount of executive orders. So we see a very active executive branch changing many things in the economy. Some of them tied to the tariffs, some of them tied to grant funding. One thing that I have seen very actively these days, is an attempt to consolidate and standardize the grant-making space. So I feel that into the future, we look into the future, we are going to see a very clear policy positions in the what it's called the uniform guidance, which is basically the fundamental framework for grants. Why this is important and why this is different. Usually that is updated every 4 years. And in this time around, it's going to be a change basically next year. And the most recent one was last year. So that is an example of how the administration is taking a very hands-on approach in changing the landscape. Answering your question more specifically, other things are changing in the DC landscape is the composition of the federal workforce. A lot of the institutional knowledge have been retiring recently. So I will say that middle management is fundamentally new or will be new. So there's a renewed need to re-educate about the specific needs, specific conditions, and understanding that if I were to describe the fundamental change in the energy policy at the national level, I will say that, and it's all illustrated in the big beautiful bill, is a shift in the perspective of coming from VERs to a more centralized base load type of power generation. So from opportunities on the demand side, we're now seeing this from the supply side. I think a lot of that is highly influenced by the fact that there's going to be a lot of power generation needs across the nation, fundamentally influenced by the fact that artificial intelligence is going to demand a lot of.
Sticking with you, Luis, you work with 13 states across Appalachia. How does Puerto Rico fare vis-a-vis that region with regards to these changes in federal funding?
Well, the way we operate, it's a partnership. So we have the federal side and we have the 13 states represented by one of the governors. So each one of the governors are the representative of their states in the commission. Some of the things that we have been talking here, for example, in the battery space, we have been able to partner to stack up the capital stack for some of these projects. We have one right now that started last year, and I was consulting with one of my colleagues, and he confirmed that they actually received the elective pay, which is one of the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act that remains in this one. So I think there's also a window of opportunity there that it's worth exploring in Puerto Rico, because elective pay is making money available to entities that do not have a tax liability. So regardless of the difference in tax regimes in Puerto Rico and the mainland, that is something that it is worth considering. For example, the one that I'm referring, it's a collective effort by 3 electric co-ops in Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. They partnered together to deploy batteries. Each one of them can apply for the elective pay. At this point, one of them has received the payment. So we offered them grants, then they they created a capital stack by going to, and then they made an initial payment. They received, in this case, I think it was 30%, because they did not pursue the community add-ons and domestic content. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space, especially because it's still aligned with policies that are included in the big beautiful bill, and other components that I'm seeing federal level.
John, we're gonna switch the conversation with regards to how does Puerto Rico, and deepening on the conversation on how does Puerto Rico fare. You know, thinking about Appalachia, and part of the reason we work with National Clean Energy Week and CREST Forum to help make this event possible is to link Puerto Rico with a broader conversation. And of course, Puerto Rico doesn't exist in a vacuum, and never is that more clear when we're talking about competitiveness. We're not the only option out there for investors. We're not the only option out there for folks that are looking to expand operations or relocate or come back to the United States. And when we think about Appalachia, typically Puerto Rico is in direct competition with southeastern states, low tax regime, lower than national average labor rates. That's sort of that's our neighborhood, so to speak, in terms of economic development. How do the changes that we're seeing with regards to reduction in credits, tariffs, changing prioritization in terms of which energy projects we should be looking at, how does that change our understanding of Puerto Rico's competitiveness? And maybe does it change our understanding of who our competitors are, either within the region or within a region as the Caribbean or region within the Southeast U.S.? How within the federal policy changes does Puerto Rico's competitiveness come out?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. To start with the tariff conversation, what we're seeing, and everybody talking about reshoring, manufacturing to the United States, et cetera. What we're seeing is right now there's so much uncertainty that a lot of site selectors and executives are either pausing decision making. The Supreme Court is going to be ruling on some of the tariff stuff, in the next couple of weeks, and there's cost increases in terms of the cost of goods sold and the materials that go into the manufacturing processes. So a lot of times, even with the tariff regimes, the effect is nullified or it's lowered in terms of bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And in some cases, with China, Southeast Asia, and some very low-cost jurisdictions, even with the tariffs, it's going to be difficult to justify bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And there's huge capital costs, capital expenditures, and with time horizons in years, 3, 5, 7 years for a lot of these big projects. So until there's more certainty on the tariff front, and I don't think there's going to be a huge big impact that we're going to see. In the short term, we've actually at the federal level seen a reduction in the last few months in manufacturing employment. It remains to be seen, what's going to happen, going forward. That being said, in Puerto Rico, what we're seeing is a lot of the current manufacturing capacity, which is, as most people know, is mostly pharmaceutical, medical device manufacturing, with some electronic components and some other. But the vast majority is in pharmaceutical and medical device. What we're seeing is expansion projects at plants that currently exist that have excess capacity. So for example, a multinational pharmaceutical or medical device company might have operations in Ireland and in Puerto Rico, and because of this tariff situation, an expansion that might have happened at the Ireland plant, they're saying, well, this is for U.S. Domestic consumption, so let's do it in Puerto Rico. So we're seeing some of that, but we're not seeing many type greenfield projects. That being said, when we talk about manufacturing in Puerto Rico, we're not talking about the manufacturing that people sometimes think about, 30, 40 years ago, where it was, basic manufacturing. The plants employed a lot of people. A plant might employ 1,500, 2,000 people. The plants nowadays, they're very they need highly technically skilled folks. So workforce is a huge component of the decision-making process when a company is talking about where they want to locate that plant. Power consumption. You mentioned a lot of these manufacturing plants have on-site generation currently. Their footprints in terms of employment are actually lower now on average than they used to be, in previous decades. So you have to kind of look at all of these things when it sounds great. Like, yes, we need more manufacturing in Puerto Rico. There's a huge fiscal impact to having manufacturers in especially the pharmaceutical manufacturers on the island in terms of what they pay in terms of taxes, even with their incentivized rates. But you have to kind of look and dig down into, okay, what are you talking about when you talk about manufacturing? You mentioned our competitiveness vis-a-vis some of the southeastern states. When Puerto Rico was in its manufacturing heyday, it was before globalization really hit big time. It was before you saw, so much manufacturing capacity in South Carolina, in Texas, in Tennessee, in Georgia, Alabama. Those are our competitors now in Puerto Rico. I mean, people talk about Costa Rica, they talk about Dominican Republic. On the manufacturing side, that's not really our competition for most of the large projects that we look at. Our competition, most of the time when we do site selection projects, our competition is usually North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. So what do those states offer? They offer lower cost of labor. They offer infrastructure, interconnected logistics, so the trucking networks, et cetera, with the mainland, in the mainland U.S. They offer low power costs. Tennessee has the, Tennessee Valley Authority, some of the cheapest power in the United States. Same thing, North Carolina, South Carolina. And they offer ease of doing business. So they make it very easy for a company to, have turnkey real estate ready, speculative industrial boxes that people could just plug right into. Puerto Rico, unfortunately, there's some challenges, and that's to put it lightly. What we do still have and what we are still able to sell is a legacy of highly skilled, high value-added manufacturing. And again, I go back to the pharmaceutical and medical device sectors. The aerospace sector, especially in Aguadilla, has really been taking off in the last decade or so. We offer a lower price point. We don't like to put that out front, but generally the cost of labor in Puerto Rico compared to some of our mainland competition could be 20 to 30% lower in some cases. And then the cherry on top that we generally offer is we're a U.S. jurisdiction, but we have a parallel tax code. So we're able to offer, vastly reduced corporate income tax rates compared to, some of our competition in the States. That being said, when you add on cost of doing business, you add on the electricity costs, you add on, permitting, you add on, the cost of having to import, the materials and then export via either ship or airplane, that eats into that incentive that we're able to offer in a lot of cases. So is there still a manufacturing case to be made for Puerto Rico? Absolutely. Are there challenges? And is this the same world that, people talk about the glory days in the 70s and the 80s under 936? Even if we had 936 today, the world has vastly changed.
Well, and my mind immediately went to 936, another federal policy change that obviously impacted Puerto Rico. But one of the key things that I think people have a misconception about 936, and we're not going to focus here, but manufacturing output went up after 936 was truly phased out. It was employment that went down. And so the sophistication in the manufacturing sector that took place at the end of the 936 era was really automation, digitalization, process improvement, and leads to the sophisticated manufacturing sector we have now. Luisa, I want to talk a little bit about competitiveness with you as well, because as states are seeing uncertainty with regards to federal funding or federal policy support, or the middle management's new and they're going to just not wait for tens of thousands of federal workers to be ready to support their needs, a lot of states are turning inwards and looking to fund projects themselves, leverage non-federal sources of capital where they can, and that's not so much an option for Puerto Rico, considering a number of our key agencies are almost somewhere between 60 and 90% federally funded. And so is this a blessing in disguise for Puerto Rico? Is it a long road ahead? How do we understand this shift, not only in competitiveness vis-a-vis states that are really looking to be able to do the development that was otherwise federally supported themselves? How should we think about that mix?
I see it as an opportunity to think outside the box and start thinking about, for example, in the energy space, technologies that traditionally have not been considered, because, as you mentioned, we don't live in isolation. In Puerto Rico, is not isolated from the world and the competitive environment in which every state, jurisdiction, territory, whatever you want to call it, is in. So I think that's one thing to consider. The other thing is to consider which are our strengths and use those to articulate the benefits of Puerto Rico. I don't think that it's going to get you a long way to articulate, hey, treat me differently because I'm coming from Puerto Rico and we have different conditions. I think the message and the narrative should be around, these are my strengths and this is what I can bring to the table to convince and persuade. Colleague here mentioned the benefits, the unique rates that our workforce would have, right? In many areas that are high-paying jobs and that are a competitive edge that I still believe Puerto Rico has in the world arena. So I think it's developing a narrative around about our strength rather than a different treatment because I am in Puerto Rico.
Doubling down on the fundamental pillars of what we're good at.
Yeah, so for those of you who are not very familiar, there's a lot of action in DC around DEI policies, diversity inclusion policies, and those are going to be, I think they are, and I think are going to be front and center of grant making, risk when not only soliciting grants, and I say risk because if somebody makes a certificate, certifies something, then they will be exposed to False Claims Act liability, and these for some grantees, especially the grantees that don't have enough capacity to see the whole picture, would be at greater risk.
Hey, Dalia, I know we're talking about federal policy, but I want to think about how Puerto Rico's local regulatory and policy landscape changes. And so I want to take us beyond the current term, beyond the current local and federal term, and what regulatory or policy changes must Puerto Rico enact to remain competitive in attracting energy investment in particular? Luis mentioned that basically everywhere across the United States, and we heard it from previous panelists and speakers today, that the generation projects are going up all over the place. And I mentioned it in my keynote earlier today. Puerto Rico hasn't developed a new generation project, hasn't gotten all the way to operating a new generation project in almost a generation, and that's an issue. So if we're going to compete in driving manufacturing, we're going to compete in driving AI or databases, which we already have a hard time because of high cost of electricity. What regulatory changes need to be implemented in Puerto Rico to attract that energy investment and remain competitive or become more competitive?
Yeah. I've always think that collaboration and speaking to each other between the public and the private sector is the key of this. In Puerto Rico, there's a lot of people with the knowledge, with the ideas, with all that we need to establish a plan, a unified plan towards getting to where we want to go. But there's always been an issue with how do we come together to get that plan made and implemented. And I don't think it's a question of changing enacting new regulation, because it's already there. We just have to modify it, maybe amend it and make it better, but we have to have a plan. And the plan has to be a long-term plan. So I think that it's important that we have that before we move forward to enacting anything else or changing any regulation. And we have seen that there have been movements towards that by creating committees or by creating task forces. But if those task forces do not continue, there's no continuity or a plan in place, then there's not going to be an implementation, which is always, for me, has been the problem here, implementation. And it can be done. We have the people, we have the knowledge, we have the resources. We just have to sit down, get a plan in place, and just implement it. And and I think the focus has to move from the political side, and it has to move to the benefit of the island. Because if energy is tackled and we get those projects to operation, then that's going to help with the rest of the of bringing new manufacturing, of expanding existing manufacturing, and economic development for Puerto Rico.
So if you had a magic wand, and I asked about a crystal ball, now a magic wand, this is not fantasy, but thinking about where, if the challenge is execution, the challenge is implementation, what do you wave your magic wand and execute tomorrow that unlocks a lot of, is a first domino, so to speak, in actual progress?
I think just having a step-by-step uniform permitting structure where all the documents that need to be filed are right there, all the checklist is right there, and you just have to submit the information. The government has a specific timeline, they look at it, they approve it, and we move on. But we can't be like we've been for years, where you submit your application or your project and you have this back and forth between the government telling you, oh, we need more information, or we need all of this, and then there's this, and then developers don't really know what to do because they keep getting requests for information and no traction. And for investors to feel confident that a project's going to get to completion, they need that traction. They need to know what they have to submit, what timeline they're going to get it approved, and they have to have engagement from the government. The government has to respond to this in a timely manner that's equal to what it would be in the private sector.
Yeah, we're going to have an in-depth conversation on that exact thing in our next segment with Crowley about longer horizon project development and sort of the guarantees required for the confidence to make those investments. You mentioned a lot of red tape. Luis, I want to think about some of the alignment or misalignment with regards to local policy and federal policy. There's a lot of bureaucratic policies or processes in place at the local level. We'll see how effective DOGE and some of the processes at the federal level to become more efficient. But obviously, there's also a broader challenge of alignment with regards to the energy projects that are being prioritized and how the Trump administration is thinking about those and how Puerto Rico traditionally has. We're seeing a shift away from that towards firm power. RFPs have not been put out. We're not entirely sure what's happening with that 3,000 megawatt procurement process. But does that represent a greater alignment between local and federal policy? And what are the other areas of realignment or opportunity to realign does Puerto Rico need to take full advantage of to work with the federal policymakers for local development?
I think there are several changes in the NEPA world that need to be considered as well in Puerto Rico. Better expedite the approval of projects. Amendments to the NEPA process. For those of you who are not familiar, the CEQ, or the Council on Environmental Quality, repeal regulations that were based on executive order that is from 1977 that gave the grounds for what goes into the environmental reviews and alike. So I think there's some lessons to be learned from that exercise, and see how to, at the local level, instead of revisiting topics that have been addressed in a particular document, the timelines, align those things with the ones at the national level. I think will benefit Puerto Rico a lot. A sense of urgency. If we know that a lot of projects will have to be in service by end of 2027, prioritize those. So the decision-making process has to factor in those elements that are at the policy at the federal level, and see, hey, I know that I have a portfolio of projects that I need to consider. Which ones should I prioritize? Acknowledging that there are components that would make the project bankable or not. So prioritize those. Second tier would be, what are the technologies that I can use to have a more reliable grid that can benefit from the strategies that are at the federal level. We mentioned varieties, and I think that's a good thing to consider, because that fully aligns with what it's in the Big Beautiful Bill. Would allow for a lot of benefits for our grid, and at the same time we'll focus on that. And then the last one is exploring new technologies, or those technologies that are well recognized in the new policy at the national level. So I think those three components are the ones where I will prioritize. And in general, keeping a pulse of what's happening in Washington. What is the narrative? What is the language? What are the priorities that are put in place? America first. What really means that? What is it really? What does it really mean? So you will see it. Domestic content priorities. Who's your partner in a business? So all those things need to be kept in mind in aligning the Puerto Rico policy with the national one, so that projects can have can come to fruition.
Who sits in the driver's seat for that alignment effort? Is that the Puerto Rico government that needs to be the leader in that, or is that federal agencies looking at the island and saying there's an opportunity to address some of the core challenges in Puerto Rico? We'd like to make sure that what develops in Puerto Rico is in full strategic alignment with what happens federally. And I, before I turn it over to you, the Department of Energy is specifically looking at Puerto Rico as a key test case for how to implement the American energy dominance strategy. It's been quiet. It will hopefully become more public, but they're looking at how does the federal government get more engaged in this? Who sits in the driver's seat to really make sure that that comes to fruition in an effective way?
I think it requires the willingness from both parties, and adding that to the sense of urgency. So if we really want to seize the moment and say, okay, I have a unique opportunity right now that is getting national attention, this is the moment for me to act. I'm talking from the Puerto Rico perspective, and keep pressing on ways to better align, increase the level of communication with the counterparts. In my experience, there's always going to be a distance between an imposition and guidance. So the local jurisdiction has to take action, needs to make clear decisions, articulate those decisions, and act upon those decisions in a timely manner. We now have timetables here, for example, for these type of projects or different types of projects. So it requires a unified effort. But delivering is more important than just talking.
So on that note, I have a final question for each of you. And Luis, we can start with you and pass the microphone down the line. What is one piece of advice that you would give to Puerto Rican policymakers to safeguard against the changes at the federal level? What would they be?
Act quickly on top priorities that are going to be influenced by the specific timelines for different policies. Be mindful of the narrative at the national level to align with that narrative, and highlight the benefits on how Puerto Rico can be part of that solution as a whole, as part of the whole nation.
Can I say same?
You can.
Same, and I think what we have to have, like I said, a plan or focus, and focus on the opportunities rather than whatever we would be missing out if we don't move quick or whatever. So I think just focus on the strategic projects, the ones that really will benefit, then we can keep moving towards the other ones. And also something that I've always seen, and I'm like, I don't understand. You don't have to focus on one thing, do that, and then move towards the other thing. You can do various things at the same time. And I think the government of Puerto Rico needs to do that. They need to focus on different strategies that obviously align all together, but not wait for one of them to work out to move towards the next. There has to be that, they have to work on parallel.
Same question to me, I guess. You know, I echo points of both of them, but I also think, you know, when you talk with a unified voice, I mean, there's certain things that are apolitical, right? Or should be apolitical. You know, having a good land use plan in Puerto Rico that's actually proactive instead of just, you know, reactive and constricting. Having a property tax system and property tax code that's pro business and pro getting stuff done. Reforming, you know, the tax code. You know, having the perception in Washington, the perception amongst federal people on both parties that I've heard when you talk about Puerto Rico, the perception is, you know, there's corruption, you guys don't know what you're doing, you know, there's no plan, you know, people, you know, you talk to one party, they want one thing. There needs to be, and to the point you guys both made, a strategy, and we need to create a playing field so that when the federal government opportunities come, you know, we can actually execute them. There's not another roadblock. No, en ese municipio, you can't do that there because this and that. No, it has to be. We have to be proactive in terms of what the strategy is and act apolitically within a single voice. Because, you know, if we want to retain population, if we want to attract talent, you know, focus on quality of life type things. We want to lower the cost of energy. The public health sector, you know, depends greatly on federal funds. If we don't get our act together, you know, there's a Medicare or Medicaid cliff in 2028. We've already gone through this, but I'm worried about that. And, you know, these are quality of life type things that, you know, we've already seen massive population loss. If you look at, you know, the size of the population, you know, 20 years ago versus today, you know, how do we reverse that? So, you know, you have to be optimistic, but I do think that what we really need is a plan that can be executed proactively, not just another plan. You know, Puerto Rico makes great plans. We have, in every single agency in Puerto Rico, you open a drawer and there's 5 plans. Mira, Hernandez Colon, it's the same plan that was in this. It's the same plan. We know what needs to happen. It's just, you know, how do you execute it? So I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, and Francisco, I'm thinking of the conversation that we had with you on the Energy Forum conversation on we need to stop planning. We just start doing stuff. I said that was the last question. I lied. I have one more, and it has direct impacts for Puerto Rico, and it goes to your point, Luis, about the very fine, subtle distinction between imposition and guidance. The president just fired 6/7 of the Fiscal Oversight and Management Board. That is something that he has unique control over in terms of being able to appoint new members. Recently, the government of Puerto Rico found additional monies, particularly as they came in from the benefits from tariff, and they tried to do a budget appropriation amendment and literally couldn't because they can't legally do that with one board member. So there's a lot of guidance that needs to be coming in that a lot of people consider imposition by way of the FOMB. What role do you think the FOMB has with on the short and middle term in terms of making sure the budget's there, but also priorities in Article. There's a lot of technical details here, but Article 5, which is the economic revitalization of the Promesa law, that actually enables the federal government to come in and say, okay, we're going to really have a hands-on role for growth, competitiveness, and sort of entering the next chapter of Puerto Rico. That question's for anybody who has a comment or a thought or wants to rub the crystal ball.
Sure, I'll start off on that one. I think, it's a necessary evil, the FOMB. My greatest hope when it started, the FOMB, was that there would be a parallel track where capacity building at the local government level to be basically doing what FOMB does, which is responsible fiscal budgeting for the island. We have a FAF. Hopefully there's knowledge transfer going on, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that FOMB got a little too comfortable. Was my perception. Yeah, we're budget. We have a nice salaries. We have a lot of these consultants. Yeah, we're working on it. We're working on it. So I think this shakeup, while it's caused a lot of uncertainty, and I'm not 100% on board with how it was done, but I do think that this could potentially be kind of a shock to the system that FOMB kind of needed. There's a lot of stuff, obviously, with the debt, with the energy debt that needs to still be worked out, and I feel like, to your point on imposition versus micromanagement, I think the FOMB has gotten a little bit too into the weeds in the last few years. So I do think that this could be a positive thing. I think the ultimate goal of FOMB is to commit suicide, is to basically get to a point where it can no longer has to exist and it needs to go away. And I'm not sure if that is the goal that they've been pursuing in the last few years. So hopefully that kind of changes with this shakeup.
Yeah, I think, as everything in life, there's some things you can't control. And the FOMB was created, and Puerto Rico had no say about it. So we have to work with them, right? And I do agree that in the past few years, it's been like they're there, but they're not there. I only see them pop up when, $10 million, the contract says more than $10 million, I have to approve it. So I think that if they are going to still be there, then they have to do what they were assigned to do. For example, the revitalization coordinator, what's going on with that? Like, that was supposed to be the person that was gonna tackle all these big projects, get them into operation in Puerto Rico, and we really haven't seen much traction on that. So I think if we have to live with them, then they have to do their job. And I agree that maybe this movement, although I do not agree with the way it was made, it should be for the benefit of Puerto Rico, in terms of, I want you to do your job so you can get out of here and get Puerto Rico up and running. With regards to, I think the FOMB is very important for the PREPA bankruptcy, which has to end. And I think everybody's been too comfortable with getting their salaries, and nothing has been moving. And that has to end for Puerto Rico to move forward, and the energy sector.
Luis, final word is yours. You'd like it.
Thank you for attending the event. No, honestly, I think we need to, and when I say we, Puerto Rico, if Puerto Rico balances its budgets, there is no need for OMB. That's what we can control. I think that should be the number one priority. Focusing on the things that would not justify the FOMB.
Luis Bernal, Edalio Gonzalez, John Bosek, thank you very much.